Yeah, I'll be doing a lot more podcasts this year. So
Oh yeah.
this is my second ever in my life.
Oh
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So let's make it a fun one.
Sure. Let's do it. I am the president and founder of a company called Blue Case, and we're called Blue Case because jet fuel comes in blue cases. And what we do is we are specialists in leadership, strategy, execution management, and we particularly focus on the leadership and cultural challenges that come with scaling companies and mergers and acquisitions. And what we've noticed is that there's a tremendous amount of unused intelligence, creativity, engagement in a company that's offline. It's in the companies, but it's offline. So we put it online, starting with the CEO and the executive team, and then throughout the organization. And I've done it with everything from Fortune 100 companies and FTSE 100, like international companies. But right now, we really focus on companies that are you know kind of between 50 and 100 million up to $2 to $3 billion in revenue, and that are successful, they're making money, but the CEO feels like they've lost their edge, like they've gone soft in the middle. There's something missing. That initial kind of startup feel where it's like really exciting and you know joyful, moving quickly. There's a sense of flow. Somehow that's lost, and people are now there's communication challenges. Things move too slowly. Innovation's more difficult. There's conflict, and we come in and very quickly uh, resolve those issues and give people very practical tools to be able to operate at a totally different level. Like we give them a leadership operating system basically that allows them to function in a totally different way and have um, a different experience at work and in their home life. The most rewarding part for me about our work is I was talking to a CEO who scaled this company that we helped him scale his company. He sold his company for a lot of money. And I said, "Hey, what do you remember about our work, or what was most meaningful?" And this was maybe 4 or 5 years. And he said, "Well, I actually use and refer to your tools all the time, like almost on a weekly basis. But the most significant thing by far is my marriage gets so much better. I had a good marriage, but my ability to listen and understand my wife completely changed, and that is the most meaningful thing that's happened."
Hmm.
And I was thinking he was going to talk about like how successful the exit was, and that kind of thing. And he was talking about my relationship with my wife,
Yeah.
you know. And so that's how we know that the tools really stick, when it's not just like, oh, at business, at work, I'm like this. When it flows across people's lives and their lives get better. We have a model and where basically the CEO and the executive leadership team, it's the nucleus of the company, and it's a nuclear model. So it's the CEO, then it's the executive leadership team, then it's a senior leadership team. And so rather than thinking of it like a hierarchy, it's who the CEO is being, what they're great at, what their blind spots are.
Mm.
That's going to be a reflection of the company.
Hmm.
Um, where they're suboptimal, we know exactly what's going to be an issue in the company. And then you go to the senior executive leadership team. It's the same thing. Where there's tension on that team, we know where there's going to be dysfunction in the organization, so that we train and develop enough people in the tools that you sort of get a tipping point and the whole company starts performing at a different level financially, culturally.
What are the? Is there common themes? One of them I think you kind of already pointed to is that the whole organization is a reflection of the CEO and his or her blind spots, um, and strengths as well. Are there are there other kind of themes that have um, stood out to you over the last 10 years?
One critical thing is how the way we relate to leadership is that leadership's a conversation. So there's a lot of different definitions of it, but we relate to leadership as a conversation. And what that means is how you speak and how you listening shapes what's possible.
Hmm.
in the organization. So if you think of like one way to think about like what is a great leader, right? Like, well, one way to think about it is how a powerful leader is able to move from ideation of a new idea to execution with a shorter velocity than a less powerful leader,
Hmm.
right? So,
Uh-huh.
how effective are they at coordinating action? And in order to do that, the way that what leaders are doing all day is they're speaking and listening.
Uh-huh.
So if you bring in a great leader, it's not like they come in with like an amazing computer, you know.
Right.
They basically speak and listen differently.
Uh-huh.
So if you, I'm not saying that's the right definition of leadership. I'm just saying that it gives you access then to something that's very practical. And the way we work is we really want to be practical, where we can introduce an idea and within a few minutes you can apply that idea and be better. We have a book coming out actually in May, and it's called Be a Better Team by Friday. The idea is that how do you come in? So like when we come in, um, we want it to be very practical. Like we usually come in and we spend 2 days with a leadership team, and at the end of those 2 days, the team is a completely different team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, the some of the themes that you were saying is in terms of speaking and listening is how honest and straight is the conversation in the leadership team meeting. Like if you just sat in on a meeting in you go to a weekly executive leadership team meeting, every single company in the world has either a weekly or a bi-weekly meeting where the team talks. And typically if you sit in, even without knowing anything about the business, the conversation is pretty ordinary. Like it's an ordinary conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And another way to say it is it's pretty low heat,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's people
Yeah.
presenting, being very polite, um, a little bit political. And when you have an ordinary conversation, you get ordinary results. And then, occasionally you have like a medium heat conversation where someone will say something and, the room will sort of like, oh, that was a little spicy of a conversation, of a comment,
Yeah.
the heat got a little warmer. And occasionally people will have an extraordinary conversation where they'll go out and like we call it like a level 10 or extraordinary conversation. And they'll say something that really moves things forward. Like, actually, I don't think the strategy you're presenting, Gabe, is the right strategy. I don't think that's going to give us the result. I disagree. With all due respect, I actually think we should be focusing more on here. I think we'd be able to get it done faster.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be might be an example. Um, and what we've noticed is that people are having those conversations, but they're having them one on one. They're having them with their husbands or wives when they come home from
Uh-huh.
work.
Yeah.
When the CEO, when he or she is in the room, or they stop having them. So how do you actually have those conversations when collectively? Because when you do that, if you can have extraordinary conversations, you can have extraordinary results.
It sounds like there's that culture in place, and that culture is mostly status quo. It's political, so people are playing their parts and they don't want to rock the boat. And but if you can come in there and kind of change that culture up where they're having those conversations in the board, not the boardroom, but in the amongst the executive team, and those are what really drive the company to another level of success. How do you cultivate that?
The fascinating thing is when you go to these teams, the teams, like usually the individuals on the team are extraordinary. Like these are high performing, like very successful, competitive, good people you would want to spend time with, right? And so individually, we were talking about this at the beginning of the podcast. Like individually, they're actually badasses, and then they come together, and it's not quite as like collectively. It's not doesn't produce this badass result, right? And it's part of why the CEO calls us. They're like, I don't get it. Like I actually have a really great team, and they're also the company is usually accomplishing like great things. Like they're making a lot of money, they're profitable. It's not like there's anything broken with the companies we work with, right? Um, they just they're growing, but the CEO is like, we should be crushing it, like we should be doing so much more, and why are we spending time, why does these things take so long? And these people aren't getting along. And, so I want to point it out when I say that people are being political. It's not, they're actually, what they're thinking is like, look, I respect this person. I don't want to make them look bad. So I want to be careful about how I say it and what I say. So they're actually coming from a good place. Um, or a little bit of like, look, I don't want to piss off the CEO. But there's something he or she's doing that's driving us all crazy, right? First, we actually just pointed out, that these are the dynamics, and there's these different levels, the ordinary, medium, heat, and extraordinary conversations, we call them, right? And then, we have the team talk about it um, and challenge them to actually up their game.
Yeah.
And even just that awareness that people can start seeing where they are currently. And we'll have done interviews, so we can actually speak to. We can share. Hey, here's what we heard. You guys are having pretty ordinary conversations, and we can ask them to confirm it. So first, you introduce the model, and you talk about the relationship to what you're sharing and the results you're getting. And then we kind of continue to build on that with other tools and skills. But that's the foundation. You have to start. There's like the as is, where we are, and then there's where you want to, what you want, where you want to be. And we talk about that this is actually what's in the way.
Mm.
Like, you think it's, when you're talking about, hey, we're not executing quick enough, or we have conflict. Well, hey, we're actually not you're having the wrong conversations,
Yeah.
you know, because people in their head are thinking like, God, I can't believe that that's not the right strategy. Or, you know, I don't, or, the CEO will sometimes think, oh no, we're having really honest conversations. Like, we're being really straight. And the team's like, no, we're not.
Really.
Because there's something about what the CEO is doing where they're sort of shutting those down, right?
Mm.
They're talking too much, or they're not really supporting, like when someone challenges them, even if they don't agree with it. Instead of, they kind of will respond in a way that doesn't encourage more of it. Instead of saying, I love that you're challenging this idea, we need more of that, fantastic, this is great.
Yeah.
I see it differently than you, and here's kind of why, but thank you so much, please, everybody. What
Mm-hmm.
Sally just did, fantastic, that was so great, let's do that all the time. I really appreciated that. And actually, I think that's a good idea. Maybe we can, how do we shift what I'm doing?
Is it generally kind of the same job from team to team, or is each team? Do you generally see the same situation, and it's kind of a plug and you know doing the same job with each team?
Both, right? I mean,
Mm.
so what I mean by that is, to your point, yes, there are orienting principles that we orient from, and that are common across teams. Like, I shared one that this is very common across a team where they're not having extraordinary conversations. They don't feel the psychological safety to do that, or there's something
Mm-hmm.
culturally in the way, and then that um, kind of translates throughout the organization to, like, people are gossiping, which is like, basically, two people are talking about something. It doesn't actually move the action forward. Versus, it's not gossip if I say, hey, I want to share something, a commitment I have that isn't being realized. So
Mm-hmm.
there are, every team is different, and the work we do is customized to that team, but they're orienting principles. So, like, another principle that we work with is, the team oftentimes is oriented around concerns, like things that they're worried about.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of framing them as commitments, and when you frame it as a commitment, it actually provides something totally different. Because when you're concern focused, it's like, you know, it's the equivalent of like riding a motorcycle. And if you're riding a motorcycle, you can crash into potholes. And if you don't see a pothole, it's dangerous, right? But if you
Yeah.
focus on the pothole, which is like the concern, you would literally crash into it, because that's where your vision is going. So you focus on the horizon, which is your commitment, and you see the potholes, but you're able to navigate around it. So helping teams distinguish between the concerns and the commitments, and having them be commitment oriented.
Yeah.
Um, More vision oriented is one. Another one is, people aren't trained and don't understand listening. they actually don't, um, they actually have never really been trained, and listening isn't distinguished for them. And great leaders are great listeners. And if you are an extraordinary listener, everything's possible. And if you're a weak listener, you're going to get, you're just, um, you're at a huge disadvantage. So we train people, how do you listen, and what are the principles? We have three principles in terms of how people listen. And then we also have a method for, a lot of teams, they're not getting good real-time feedback. Like they're getting feedback, but but how do you make it more on the court, kind of the way it happens in sports, where it's like feedback is constant. They're like the coach is literally shouting things to the players to improve their performance. And so we it's another thing that's oftentimes missing. And
Mm-hmm.
so um, we introduce a mechanism like listen. How do you do listening tours so that you can improve much more quickly?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say listening is another really key theme, and making sure training people how to deeply listen, what that actually means, because people have no idea what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. You bring up when you're talking about vision, orienting to vision, um, or commitment over concern, it dawned on me that, so I've known you for 10 years, which is about, so you must have started this the same time, same year that we met. Yeah, and you've always struck me as someone who naturally orients to that vision, or uh, goal is another word, but I prefer vision. It's a more expanded, much more expanded word, I think. And where was I going with that? Yeah, so I have some vague sense of this. It's like I'll riff for a second and see what you pick up out of it, but when I orient to vision, there's a lot of things that change with that. Or I orient to commitment, like commitment and vision. Those are generative, progressive. Maybe not the best word, but they're generative. They're in the direction of progress. It doesn't mean that there aren't concerns and potholes that need to be attended to. But when I take my attention off of the little problems and put it on the bigger picture, I notice, and it's vague for me, but I notice, using a fancy word, a reconstitution in my body.
I, like anybody, come from concerns and commitments, and can just as easily and often go into concern resolution instead of commitment. So, and I have to practice so that I don't do that. And my team is trained, and they'll call me out on it all the time too, which they do when I'm
Uh-huh.
doing it. So, but what you said, I think, is great, because one of the cues that I have for me when I'm in concern, because the challenging thing about when you're coming from a concern, is actually, I think in my mind that it's actually a commitment. It's the concern is tricky. The concern is disguising itself as a commitment,
Hmm.
right? And so it doesn't occur all the time like, oh, I'm coming from a concern. It comes from, actually, this is really important.
Yeah.
This really matters.
Yeah.
So the way, the short cue of how I know it's a concern is if I feel a, a lot of body tension, and I feel like this has to be dealt with urgently,
Mm-hmm.
usually a concern.
Uh-huh. So if there's a sense of urgency and it's
Like a sense of
stressful.
but when I say urgency, like this needs to be dealt with. Like I need to, next 3 minutes, you know,
Uh-huh.
kind of a thing,
Yeah.
like that level. It doesn't mean
It
that it's not a commitment. There could be a breakdown that actually requires a a quick response or an urgent response. But there's a difference between sort of strategic urgency and reactive urgency. And when I'm in that kind of reactive urgency, where it's stimulus response,
yeah.
then I'm oftentimes acting out of concern, or others are acting out of concern, and it's just not going to get the result you want.
Uh-huh.
You know, a leader, um, leader we were working with in the meeting, sales numbers were, this was years ago, sales numbers were being presented and they were poor. And so the CEO just started like in the meeting, just kind of coming after the sales leader. Right.
Yeah.
And, um, and really challenging them, but in a way that actually wasn't going to produce the result that CEO wanted.
Yeah.
Right. And so what it did is it wound up creating fear on the team. It wound up kind of derailing the meeting. And what was actually happening for the salesperson is that there were complex challenges that were in the way that the
Hmm.
sales leader actually needed help solving.
Yeah.
They weren't like technical issues where like, where he just had to work harder or something like that. He wasn't putting enough effort. It was actually, there were some, it was an adaptive challenge. In other words, adaptive challenges, you don't know what the solution to the problem is, and you might not even know what the problem is. Exactly. So they knew the problem that wasn't getting, they weren't closing enough sales, but they didn't know the source of the problem.
Hmm.
And the CEO quickly jumped to, oh, well, you're just not, you need to be pushing harder, and what's wrong with you, and that type of thing. So that was kind of the CEO coming from concern. Now, the CEO had a commitment to deliver the sales numbers for that quarter and for that year. It was critical to the board, to the investors, right? But in doing it, it actually moved things backward. So coming from commitment would actually be a totally different way of operating in that same situation.
So in aviation, we practice these emergency uh, simulations in a full motion simulator. And one of the worst emergencies you can have is right after a cut. After a certain threshold in airspeed on your takeoff roll. Once you've crossed that line, it's the go no go line. So anything below that speed, you abort and you stay on the runway, no big deal. Okay, that's one thing. But once you've gone past that speed and say you're just lifting off and you lose one of your engines, or you have an engine fire, so the engine's literally on fire, and um, and you're getting all these red lights and yellow lights, caution lights, warning lights, all this stuff is happening, right? Those are concerns. But the commitment is to keep the airplane from crashing. And so what they teach us to is, in aviation call it fly the airplane. Fly the airplane means literally fly the airplane. That is keeping the nose up, keeping the airplane flying up. What they explicitly don't want us to do is fight the fire. It's literally let the fire burn. In fact, that engine can fall off for all we care, because the commitment is to keep the airplane in the air. Now, the the reason you don't fight the fire is because and it is a valid concern, and you do want to do it at the appropriate time in the appropriate way, but if you fight the fire right away and you kind of forget what the airplane's doing, you could be pressing the buttons while the airplane noses over into the ground, just because you forgot to keep it pointed in the right direction. So I like that, and I could see that in myself all the time. It's something, it grabs me, and so
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I love that metaphor. It's, yeah, because the lights are flashing, and
yeah,
and it's legitimate. Like you said, like there is a fire.
yeah,
Um, but focusing on it doesn't produce the result. It basically, you could put the fire out but crash the plane, right? So
that's
I love
right.
that. That's perfect. So keep the nose up, fly the airplane. So
Yeah,
yeah, basically it's basically making sure that the team is regularly focused on flying the airplane instead of responding to the lights. Because the truth is, every executive team you walk into that meeting, there are tons of lights going on all the time.
that's a greater level of awareness, right? You have to see further and farther, and also how you have to somehow not be captured by the concerns, given that we tend to be reactive to concerns. How do you help these people not react and stay oriented to commitment?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's kind of managing. Just to make this very practically, what another way to say that is like how much stress levels in the body, right?
Mm.
And if you're on a
Mm-hmm.
spectrum, right, is it like kind of the optimal level of stress that kind of gives you some focus where you have
Mm-hmm.
energy, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's eustress, which is useful. Are you lethargic, on the other side where you actually would benefit from a little bit more energy in the body, right?
Ah,
Or is it right in that middle, right? And
yeah.
so if you're redlining, like you're like in that your example, right? So if you're flying the airplane and you're feeling so stressed, you're panicking, you might not be able to fly the airplane because you're panicking, right? And
Right.
you can't think straight. You're not calm. One of the things I believe really serves you and my other friends who are pilots is, all of them have the ability to calm themselves, to stay calm actually in a really stressful situation, and to be able to so that they can actually utilize their full brain instead of just being in the reptilian brain, which actually wouldn't might not even have the choice to actually fly the plane, right?
Yeah.
So when you notice, first it's noticing that, and if you are redlining, then you know taking some deep breaths, taking a break, going for a walk, talking to someone, doing something to kind of get yourself back in into that optimal state, and then getting things out, writing things out, making
Mm.
sure or we the leaders that we work have coaches, right? So we're usually coaching them, and so um, they might call us and do some spot coaching, like, hey, I need 10 minutes of your time. We have an airplane, we have an engine
Yeah.
fire. They
Yeah.
can call us, and we'll work with them to kind of reorient them, right?
Mm.
But also you can do it with yourself with just taking a few deep breaths. It
Mm.
changes it neurologically moves you into a fuller brain state where you can return to a sense where you do feel spacious, where you do feel less tension. You can do
Mm.
a 2-minute body scan, for example. So, um, there's I am part of a EO group, like an entrepreneur organization group, and we'll start the meeting with a 1 minute, like a 1 minute mindfulness meditation,
Mm.
just literally 60 seconds, where we come in and these are busy executives doing things, and we'll just spend 60 seconds um, focusing on our breath, doing a body scan where you bring your attention from the top of your head to the tips of your toes,
Mm.
and by the end of the minute, the team is different. If you could measure people's blood pressure, their breathing, their heart rate, 60 seconds, right? So there's things that our tool that we use, it's called the 2-minute reboot,
Mm.
that we do. And so we give people these tools. We'll show them how to spend 2 minutes doing either a body scan or focusing on their breath for 2 minutes, so that they can actually get back to that optimal state. And if you don't have 2 minutes, you can do 15 seconds.
Mm. Yeah. Is there a time in the last 10 years for you where you came home like super inspired from a moment, working with the team or executive? Does anything stand out
I
for you?
have I, I have moments like that regularly, actually, where
Mm.
um, coming in to an organization that's where it's usually sort of after like a 2-day offsite or something with a team, and that would typically be,
Mm.
well, I mean, it could be a 2-day offsite, or it could be a coaching call, actually, um, or it could be actually a meeting with my team, any of three of those. Yeah, and so I actually have those moments regularly. And to use kind of what you were
Mm.
saying, what I oftentimes notice is that the team kind of using that same spectrum of, like, are they in stress, are they lethargic, right? Because you could use that. I was using it individually, but you can kind of use it as a team too. Like, where are they? Some teams are redlining. Some teams actually need a little bit more edge. Like the CEO is like, where's the edge? Because the team's kind of, they're coming from the status quo. They're focusing on predictable results. Things are moving forward, but they're not really challenging themselves. There's something missing. Um, there's something in the way. And
Yeah.
what I actually,
Yeah.
um, you know, love is when I have that experience where people feel like they feel their fire and they feel the individual fire of the team, right? Like sometimes, people's
Mhm.
fire gets dim and people talk about it like, hey, I just feel like I go to work, it doesn't enliven me, and they'll do these projects outside, right? They're just like, all right, I like these people, but I just feels, or it's so
Yeah.
stressful, or gosh, it's so, it's so like status quo. Like, how do we get out of, like, there's so much bureaucracy. Sometimes you can actually walk into a building and feel it. I was working with, like a
Mm.
Fortune 10 company, and you'd walk into the company, you could just sort of feel the lethargy, that was going on. People were so process oriented that it was, you would just notice it in terms of how much energy there was in the room and how people were expressing themselves. And so for me, when there's aliveness, like we have, we'll sometimes talk about like uh, how many candles did we light? Right. This is like and the idea that we're kind of throwing sparks, how that we're just throwing sparks and trying to kind of
Mm-hmm.
ignite teams so that that fire is present. And fire is inspiring. I mean, even
Yeah.
just think about how lovely it is to sit around.
Yeah.
You know, you're out in the woods, or just, I went to Dripping Springs, just to a little cabin with some friends, and we just had a fire and we'd sit around that fire at night, and it's very inspiring to be around that, and it's inspiring to be around a team that is collectively feeling that fire. And in a sense, that's kind of what we're helping do, is to help restore that fire, to light people's candles so it can burn brighter, fuller, right? And that's, um,
Yeah.
it's very inspiring for me when that happens, and people share it.
Yeah. I feel like I know what you're talking about with a fire. What is it what is that fire about? What does it signify?
Well, it signifies that, earlier I was talking about that in an organization, there's a lot of unused, like there are these, like, there's all this unused potential that's offline. And it's part of the reason why it feels a certain way, because people feel, these incredibly bright people and creative
Okay.
people, and they
Yep.
don't feel like they can actually contribute everything. Something's in the way. Like they can't, they
Yep.
say their idea, but their idea doesn't get across the bridge. Or they're trying to execute a project and they can't
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
successfully execute it. Or, there's cross-functional communication, is um, it, it's problematic, right? Because like people can't, like, I need you to buy into this, and but you have other initiatives and your team, and so I kind of can't get it done. So takes way longer, right? And this is very
Mm.
common. Like a startup, you can sometimes have a startup with like 10
Yes.
people. They can do like a project. They can get it done faster than the time. You know, they can get it done in 3 months. The prototype works and
Right.
it's under budget. And you go to a large company with people that are, incredibly smart, incredible resources. It takes twice as long. The prototype doesn't work and it was more expensive, right? 3 times long, 4 times long. So when an
Yeah.
organization scales, like being able to, how do you get it done with the same speed of a startup? Um, so what starts happening is you have that ability to um, have for seamless cross-functional communication. You have the unused potential, the unused creativity, the unused intelligence that's now online. So people feel like, wow, I am like really, I can contribute everything I want to contribute here. Like I'm really being um, I'm really able to give everything I have to give. And when people have that opportunity to like really give their
Yeah.
gifts, there's a magic in that, and you individually and collectively. And that's kind of what happens when
Yeah.
these companies, when we put that online. That's why the companies do so well, and that's why people feel so good at work, because all of a sudden, um,
Yeah.
they're actually contributing. it doesn't they don't have to go somewhere else. So that's what it looks
Yes.
like is when that unused potential is online, um, and and you can feel it. You can feel it when you talk to someone and when their
Yeah.
fire's lit, or they're going to work and they're like, this is incredible. I really, you know, I feel respected. I feel listened to. I feel understood. I feel cared about by the person who manages me. Like he or she cares about me.
Yeah.
I can actually say anything at work, and I will be heard. Like people will listen to me, and even if they don't
Yeah.
agree with me, like I can actually. It's okay to share divergent ideas and or disagree. And when people have that, they light up and they usually don't leave jobs and they feel great. And when you can do that on a team, alignment is much faster. People are on the same page, get it, and know how to get on the same page quickly. So
Yeah.
that's what it looks like and feels like a little bit.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I just reflecting, I've only taken part in two large organizations in my life, and one of those was in the airlines, and I got to see what happened when I joined up with this airline. They had been growing for years, and the captains, everybody in fact, but specifically the captains, were very conscientious about saving fuel. And saving fuel, maybe we save $200 in fuel just by doing something slightly different in our operation of the airplane. And the motive for that was they were contributing to the growth. It's like, well, saving fuel is saving expenses. That's a better bottom line. That money can be used to expand the operation of the airlines, which means that I'll move up in the ranks. I'll have more people underneath me. There'll be more opportunity for me. So what's good for the company is good for me. So we're on the growth mindset and happy to contribute to that. And then 2008 hit and the economy slowed down to a halt and we were no longer growing. And I watched that mentality completely shift. I know it's not exactly the scenario you're talking about. There's extraneous circumstances, but I watched their mindset shift from being concerned about a couple $100 in fuel to not caring at all to being resentful and actually purposefully burning fuel. So, uh, you know, it's not a one to one, but I can see that it's like you want to be part of something that's growing and you want to be contributing to what's growing, and that's a human nature thing, and that's the
Yeah,
individual
and
fire
also those
being part of a
pilots
greater fire.
have so many different ideas to actually how to make the airline more efficient. They have
Yeah.
they are literally they have lists of ideas.
Yes.
They have things that they could do that are easy to do and would make a huge difference in the organization. That collectively, would save millions of dollars.
Yes.
That would make or small shifts that would make their life so much better if the company were willing to invest in these areas, right? Like just make this
Yes.
little change for us. It would make a huge difference. We will give you
Right.
we'll be more loyal to you and we will give you more of what we have if you can, give us this. And so, but the CEO, he or she's sitting there and they don't actually know that. They don't have access to those ideas. And so like when they do, um, it's totally different. And the funny thing is, it doesn't depend on the pilots. It's not a function of the pilots. It's a function of how the CEO is speaking and listening. And are they and do they really understand?
Right. So yeah.
Do they understand how to listen? And do they understand that their listening is not it's not sufficient to get the results they want? And when they shift it and understand how to listen
Hmm.
differently, it changes everything.
Well, that's a great full circle because I wanted to come back to the listening thing because I was trying to understand, well, how do you listen better exactly? And so, but it's a theme, and it reminds me of a phrase that we're both familiar with. So they just need to expand the scope of what they are taking into account. And so that means opening doors so you can start hearing the people at the
Yeah, well,
bottom.
it's actually hearing everyone, right? And so, the principles you were asking, sort of like what
Mm-hmm.
other, what we, when we're working with a leader on their listening, because it's not just the CEO, it's anyone who's managing people. You don't even have to be managing people. We talk about there's kind of like three levels, and like the first level is actually just what's being said, and usually people are missing even what's being said because they're so distracted by what's going on with them personally,
Mm-hmm.
what they're working on. They look like, they're making eye contact. It looks like they're paying attention, but they're not. So first is actually just really being able to focus on someone. I mean, people talk about like, oh, I don't have time to, for a mindfulness practice, or I don't have time. Well, actually listening is a mindfulness practice. You can listen and actually regulate your nervous system,
Yes.
because if you
Yeah.
just put your full focus on someone else,
Yeah.
this happens for me with my kids, right? So I have two daughters, and my mind will wander with my daughters, right? So I'll be playing, it's something, playing dolls, my 7-year-old or something, while she's taking a bath or something. My mind will wander. Well, first of all, she notices, right? And it requires conscious effort for me to
Mm.
actually, just be in the conversation, and to put all of my attention so that I can
Yeah.
actually hear just what she's saying, right? So that's the first, is this, it's what's said, and then the second level is
Yes.
actually what's
Yeah.
unsaid, right? What's being implied by the body language, by the tone. And this is particularly important, like if you're managing someone's, there's a power difference. There's in most dynamics, there's a difference in power, right? And so if a manager is talking to their
Mm-hmm.
direct report, or the CEO, if she's talking to anyone in the company besides really a board member, right? She has more power. So what, if she's listening,
Yeah.
what is the unsaid? What's being implied? How open is their body? What is their tone like? Do they feel, are
Yeah.
there, um, and really listening for what's being not being said, and then checking, hey, um, hey, it seems like you seem a little bit nervous talking about this initiative and the time on the initiative. It seems like you have some stress about that, and you seem a little nervous. Is that true? And then the person can correct them and say, actually, no, I'm not. I'm really excited. This is just, you know, this is when I get excited, it can look this way, but or yeah, I am a little nervous, about it. But whatever it is that, that person can
Mm-hmm.
check and say, and address, is this what the unsaid was? And you want to check the said as well. And then the third level is listening for the fundamental why, or the underlying commitment of what someone is saying. There's always a commitment underneath what someone is speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Mm.
don't oftentimes articulate what the
Yes.
commitment is, but it's there and you can hear it. And yeah, and
Yeah.
so, and then also, but then
Yeah.
checking it with the person too,
Avoid.
and saying, I think you have this, it seems like you're really committed to this. Is that true? And if you can hear that, and speak to someone in that way, if you can listen, for those levels, it gives you access to so much innovation. It gives you access to, so much information that is
Mm.
outside of things that and it's where, and it
Yeah.
really opens up what's possible in a company.
Hmm. Very cool. That how I relate to that is just in my relationship with my girlfriend Sammy. It's and I think at least a lot of men can relate to this. Is women want to talk about the relationship, and I think generally I want to say we. I'll just say me. I'll hear it as like complaints. I'm not doing something right, or something's not working well enough, and it's stressful, and I want to just eradicate that as fast as possible. But really, behind that is something that I am on board with, which is making the relationship better, right? And if I can hear that, if I can recognize that, yeah, then I have some spaciousness. I can be creative, and I can join her, but it's interesting. It's just the initial reaction is stress and pushing away, and trying to eliminate what I perceive to be a problem.
Yeah, it's the flashing lights, right? What's happening is it's the flashing lights, and all of a sudden you want to respond to the flashing lights, right? And so, you know, and and also, and it's actually being able to hear what is the commitment here. And when you say back the commitment, hey, we want to keep this, we want to keep the nose up, we want to keep the plane flying, we want to keep this relationship. You have a really strong commitment to this relationship and making it the most extraordinary thing. That's a source, whatever it is, that's really us, that's sourceful for you, that has us both thrive. And I really hear that, and and then saying back what I'm making that up, and then what and I hear you have some of these. You didn't. You seem a little bit stressed about some of these things. You didn't use this word, but I wonder if you're worried, or you're afraid. You're checking the unseds, and you really have this request, that I do this or I don't do this.
Yeah.
Is that right? What did I miss? And just saying it back, it's then you're actually communing with her. Then you're actually, the point of a conversation
Mm-hmm.
is to be able to actually, if you leave the conversation and you have the same point of view that you did before you started the conversation, it really wasn't an effective conversation, right? So like you actually want to have a sense of communing where there's some
Uh-huh.
coming
Yeah.
together. Doesn't mean you agree, but there can still be a space where there's a
Right.
welcoming, um, and there's a sense of when Byron Katie talks about I really understand you, and the answer is no. But there's still this, like, there's a
Mm-hmm.
connection. If you or your listeners are curious, um, we do have a book coming out, um, and um, and I'll just this is our book. This is what our book is. So if you want to, so look for this. I'm the co-author. Justin's the lead author. So that Be a Better Team by Friday, a playbook for high performance business leaders. If you want to learn and understand some of the principles we talk about, it's all in here, or a lot of it's in there. So that it will be released in May of 2023. And we're really excited about it. We think it's a great book. So,
Excellent. And I imagine that it's for any kind of leadership, and that can be within the family.
well, Gabe, thanks
Yeah.
for this is a great first. This is a
Awesome.
great second podcast of my life. Thanks for asking me. I feel honored to be here and honored to share. And it was
Likewise, I'm honored to have you.
yeah,
And
it was a pleasure. So happy to do it again sometime.